Greg Tamlin is a musician who travels all over, sings, and he has a friend that lived with a lot of fear, but he was also a great musician, and he finally got the opportunity to go to Europe and to travel for a year in Europe. But Greg's friend was terrified, and so it took a lot of coaching for him to be able to step out of his fear. But he finally accepted the invitation. He was going to Europe for a year. Now, he had one thing that he needed to take care of. He owned a monkey, and he could not take his monkey to Europe. This is a true story. So he had to figure out what to do with his monkey for a year so he could go to Europe. He put an ad on Craigslist, explained his story, and sure enough, he got a response the next day. A guy said, "I also have a monkey. I'd be happy to keep your monkey if they'll stay together." So Greg went over the next day and saw the man and was amazed that the monkey looked a lot like his, and so they talked about it. The following day, he came back with his monkey. They put them both in the same room. They had them in their cages, and the monkeys started screaming and shaking their cages. And the guy quickly took his monkey back out and said, "This has never worked. I knew it was a mistake. I knew I shouldn't go to Europe. Maybe I just can't do it." And the other man said, let's just give it time. Come back tomorrow. He came back the next day, and what they did for a solid week, for 7 days, they put the monkeys in the same room, and they would move the cages a little bit closer, closer, closer. But every day for a solid hour, the monkeys would scream and rattle the cage. Finally, it's the last day, and the guy has to make the decision. I'm either going to leave this monkey, face my fears, and go, or I just can't. And he wanted to back out, and the other man said, "No, we've come this far. Let's take the final step." So on that day, they unlocked both cages. The monkeys flew out, ran to each other, and embraced. And they stood there and held each other, and they could not pry them apart. And the guy said, I realized that sometimes there's things inside of us that is screaming, and we want to run away, we want to stop. But really that which is screaming is wanting us to take a step towards love. When grace shows up and we're stuck in our fear, it is asking you, what one step can you take in the name of love to move you closer to your dream, closer to fulfilling whatever is your calling? Doorway number 1, grace shows up when we're living in fear. Number 2, which is story number 2. The second story Jesus told is a woman who had 10 coins and she lost one. And having lost a coin, she lit a candle and turned the house upside down until she found it. And when she found it, she rejoiced. Now, we may not understand the moral of that story, but the moral of that story, that audience would have known the universe will not allow you to live beneath your potential. Have you ever felt like, I'm coming up just one coin short? I'm just one coin short of having my stuff all together. 2 coins short. Do I hear 3 coins? Well, the universe is not going to let you live at 90%. Because if it has to, and this is not an outside God coming in doing this to you, this is the way evolution works. Evolution is always expressing itself in more complex and more evolved ways. It's no different in our life. Life is always pushing you to express and to reveal your divine. There's a gentleman, his name is Bill Plotkin. He wrote a book, Soulcraft. His life's mission is to work with people when they're going through a life crisis. He does soul journeys. He wrote this: "Many people fill their days with 1,001 distractions in an attempt to fill and muffle the cries of their soul. Often these distractions become our addictions: consumerism, eating disorders, substance abuse, compulsiveness, workaholism, religious fundamentalism, obsessive thrill-seeking, or gambling, all of which further contribute to our dysfunction and living in a state of separation. Yet the soul always calls, saying it's time to inherit a greater life. This is both a crisis and an unsurpassed opportunity. The old way of life has been outgrown. The familiar goals, attitudes, and patterns of relationship no longer fit your developing sense of who you are. The time has arrived to step over a threshold into a whole new way of being. Something within you is seeking to be found, uncovered, discovered, and expressed. Can you see the universe turning the household over, looking for that part that's withholding, that's lost? Suddenly your life shifts and nothing quite fits. Something crucial is lacking or missing. This is the soul appearing on the scene with an attitude and with a comment about the course of your life, shouting, "Hey, look, I've come a long way to deliver a gift to the world, and I'm tired of this damn foot dragging, so excuse me while I rock your world." Have you had the universe rock your world? Yeah. And so often we get stuck on, why is this happening? Well, sometimes we may have been able to make different choices, sometimes not, but the question is, how are we responding? Grace is there when we're living in fear. Grace is also there when we're living beneath our potential. Number 3, which happens in story number 3. The next story is the story that's called the story of the prodigal son. It's actually a story of a man with 2 sons. And if you're familiar with the story, this man had 2 sons. The younger son came and asked for his inheritance, and the father gave it to him. Now, really, this would never have happened. In this particular culture, it was equivalent to saying, "Dad, I just wish you'd drop dead so I could have my inheritance." You didn't do that in that culture. And if he did do it, the father would have taken his left hand, driven him out of the house, broken a clay pot at the door, and said, "You're not my son, you don't come back." So the audience knew, okay, this is not the way. This is like cursing with a policeman, spitting on him, chasing him down, and then a police officer finally stops you and says, "I just wanted to hug you." We would say, "What? That never happens." Well, the audience, when they heard these stories, they knew it wasn't about real or unreal. It's trying to make a point. So story number 3 is saying, here's a son who asked for what was his. He left home, and when he left home, the story says he immersed himself in wine, women, and song. He did everything to blaspheme his family, his God, his name. He lost all his money. He lost all his friends. And he found himself tending for pigs, which is the absolute worst thing a young Jewish boy could have been doing. So the story is just painting a picture that says this guy just totally screwed up. I mean, he made a horrible, horrible mess. But in the midst of all of it, the scripture says he came to himself. Now what that means is it's sort of like saying he finally put a mirror in front of his face and said, "You know what? This is real, and I got to do something about this mess that I'm in." And so he went up and he went back to his father's house, wanting and hoping he could at least convince his father to let him be a hired hand. Well, the story surprises us by saying his father ran out and greeted him and kissed him and never even judged him and just said, "Son, I've been waiting for you." This story is seeking to demonstrate to us that grace is there in those times that we find ourselves in shame and despair. Guilt is a healthy thing. Shame is not. Guilt says, "I did something wrong." Shame says, "I am wrong." Shame is this undercurrent that fuels our belief that we're inherently flawed. Those times in our life when we feel like we've really messed up, it's grace that can meet us there, and no matter what we've done, there is no judgment, but is seeking. Remember the story, the man on the train? Grace is always seeking to open you up, to allow the divine influence upon your heart and have it reflected in your life in such a way that you're open and you open to love. The last one is the other son in this story. Now, when the younger son came home, the older son was off in the field. He heard that his younger brother came home. He heard that Dad was throwing a big party, and he was ticked off. Because he had done everything right. He was sort of Mr. Live by the rules, play it right. I've done it all right. And here his dad acting like an idiot, celebrating for my brother.